Hi, and I'm glad to welcome our next speaker, newly promoted Brigadier General Stephanie Ahern. Congratulations, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm so excited to learn more about your new role and some of your leadership qualities.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to be here.
So Army Futures Command, which you are a part of as Director of Concepts, it was stood up only recently, relatively speaking. I mean, we're talking about 2018, and it's been instrumental in not only modernizing the Army, but also contributing to the overall military-wide joint all-domain command and control, as we know to be GADC2.
Yes, well said.
Tell us about your role within AFC and a little bit about the command's overall focus in this modernization effort.
Of course. And again, it is such an honor with the tremendous leaders that you have here today, all who just happen to be women. And so I really appreciate being able to have this discussion. So Army Futures Command established here in Austin, the headquarters 3 years ago. It's actually the first 4-star command that we've had established since 1973. So this isn't something that the Army does frequently. General Murray will say, and he's our commanding general, that we have 4 main large missions at Army Futures Command. The first is to describe that future operational environment. So not only the threat, but also how will the environment change, how will technology change, and how should we be prepared for whatever is coming in the future. The second one is to develop and design concepts, which is what I do as far as part of the Army Futures Command. But one of the things that we emphasize heavily, it's not the concepts community on our own. Not only do we look at that future operational environment, but we also pair very closely with the science and technology community. And I know Cindy Bedell is going to be on the next panel, so she'll talk much more about that. But as we're developing the concepts, making sure that we're designing concepts that are feasible, but then also making sure that we're able to push that demand signal back to the Army research labs and the others who are developing some of those technologies of the future. The third main part of the Army Futures Command is then to design and develop future force designs. So once we have an idea of the future, once we have an idea of how we could operate differently, we then need to come up with ideas, the requirements across the doctrine, the different organizations, the different skill sets, the different training and education that our leaders in our units will be able to do to employ those capabilities in the future battlefield. And then the last part is then working with our acquisition community that's led by the Assistant Secretary for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology to bring those good ideas to the warfighter as quickly as possible.
Awesome. So a ton of moving parts, and it's kind of fascinating to, or will be fascinating to learn more about that concept side of where all this is going. So
yes.
Was there anything surprising to you when you first joined the command?
So I think that based off of my last job, so then Undersecretary McCarthy working with then Vice Chief of Staff of the Army McConville and Dr. Esper and General Milley when they were still leading the Army. I had been able to work when Secretary McCarthy went up and became the secretary. I was working for him. So we had a lot of interactions with Army Futures Command from my last job. What I didn't appreciate until coming into this job was that the concepts. So I grew up as an engineer, but then switched to be an Army strategist. And so, trying to understand how we get to a better future is part of what I do for a day job. But I didn't realize the concepts community, that it actually was a community. And so you have people that have been coming from many different backgrounds as far as maneuver and intelligence and fires and mission command, but then also have the goal of how do we describe an aspirational future that's either new technologies that don't yet exist, new ways of using that technology. So think, for instance, the Blitzkrieg in World War II, where those technologies existed in World War I, but Germans were able to apply them in a different way in World War II. Or the technology and the new ways of existing, we need to think about that for the future. And so being able to come into this community has been tremendously helpful because we have a lot of work ahead for us.
Awesome. So tell us about what role AFC has in the overall modernization concept that not just the Army is working toward. I mean, this is a whole military-wide effort.
Oh, it absolutely is. So as far as for modernization and how Army Futures Command has been guided in what's our mission. So we do look across how we could fight. So the operations, how the units are actually fighting on the battlefield, how soldiers are able to work within the units that they're operating, what we fight with. So those material aspects, so we'll often talk about the 31+4 signature efforts. We have cross-functional teams to make sure that whether it's the ground or the helicopters, whether it's our long-range precision fires, the air missile defense, our network, our assured precision navigation and timing, or those soldier lethality in the synthetic training environment, making sure that our soldiers are best prepared for that future fight. But that it also is who we are. And so as we're modernizing, making sure we have the best concepts and doctrine, making sure we have the best material, but then also making sure we have the best people prepared. But one of the things when General Murray gave us the assignment to work on the future concept, he's like, the only two ways that you can fail, and that's for our team, is that if it wasn't joint and if it wasn't designed to be working with allies and partners. And so we know as an Army, we're never going to fight alone, and we're very thankful for that. And so part of my team that does Army concepts, we also have within the directorate, the joint concepts team. And so the Army's support of the joint warfighting concept, we work very closely with the Army partners at the Pentagon to make sure that as the joint warfighting concept is being developed for the future, that we are helping inform that. We have a team that does joint wargaming. Their job is to make sure that as we are wargaming for future technologies that don't exist, or for instance, the Project Convergence, when we're able to take technologies that aren't yet fielded, many of them in the labs, that is a place that Army Futures Command is focused, so that we're not waiting until we field a system to know how can soldiers better use this. And so Project Convergence, the first event that we had was last year. We had joint partners watched. We had a couple of close allies that watched. Very excitingly this year, we are expanding it, and so it is joint by design. So we have at the 3-star level, the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, and the Army, we are designing this to be able to stress the joint force using some of those new ideas so that we are able to, if any one of, whether it's a F-35 or it's a soldier, is able to pick up using a sensor on the battlefield, there's a challenge, there's an opportunity to be able to pass through the systems, instantaneously to the right shooter or whomever is going to use that to then the right command and control node, because we are not going autonomously to fire lethal capabilities in an offensive way. Ethics absolutely still matters. The law of armed conflicts absolutely still matters. But we have to do this in near real time. And so we can do that in theory, and war games really help, but when you're able to get it in the dirt to be able to experiment with this, with coders, with the operators, we know things can move more quickly. And so we're very excited about what's happening this year. And then in next year, again, in the progression, we'll have select allies and partners to make sure that as we are developing these new systems, and we being the joint force, we're also working with our allies and partners and not, trying to tack them on at the end and saying, how does this work for you? So it is very exciting, but I would say that we're doing our homework to make sure the Army is prepared for that joint fight. But thankfully, from General McConville down, working with his counterparts as well, this is something that could not be clearer, that this has to be a joint effort. And again, working with our allies and partners as it makes sense. Awesome.
And certainly a lot of opportunity for technology. And so you've served in various strategic and tactical levels over the course of your entire military career. How have these experiences informed any of those tech initiatives that you're tackling now under the concepts director?
No, that's a great question. I think one of just being aware of what questions we have to ask. And so thankfully within the concepts, it's a tremendous community, but we don't include scientists. We don't include the threat experts, but we don't have to. So one of the initiatives General Murray has really been emphasizing that's been well embraced is this Ignite approach, to where from having the different experts, you have the concepts community, the S&T community, the threat community, and operators from the beginning, what are the problems and what are the opportunities? And so, one of the leaders that is on Lieutenant General Scott McKean's staff, he is my immediate boss. He's the director of Futures and Concept Center, Dr. Jean Vettel. So she is a neuroscientist by training, by education. She comes from the Army Research Lab, from DevCom, but she is a part of the immediate team, so that as we're thinking about how can we move things forward, not only does she have her own expertise, but able to tap into this much broader S&T community. I think, understanding that things are going to continue to change. Some of my jobs, we've been able to understand we are not the only country in the world. And to include allies and partners, there are others that are changing very quickly. And so having some of that drive that this isn't optional has been really helpful. And then I think the other is that this isn't just an Army challenge or a joint challenge, but one of the efforts that the Army Futures Command has also really pressed is from a university perspective. So we are really, really fortunate to have the Army Research Labs, who have tremendous partnerships with the joint community, with DARPA, with others, but having those links also with the universities, and how are Americans and how are others of our like-minded partners able to pull these efforts forward. And so having a sense of where the parts are, but to know who are some of the experts who then we can ask questions to then start pushing and pulling. I think that's been one of the most helpful aspects of something that I'm actually just not technically trained for.
Is there any particular technologies that your command is looking at, or any specific investments that you're making toward this overall goal?
So yes would be the short answer. I think the Army modernization strategy that was published 2 years ago, so Army Futures Command had identified 10 buckets of efforts, and those remain the guiding lights that we're looking at. And so, General Murray will always talk about the role of emerging technologies. The ones that come up quickly are, of course, AI, autonomy, and robotics, underpinned by data in the network. But when we look across the role of synthetic bio and quantum computing and energetics and storage for power and distribution for power, hypersonics, that list of 10, and I'm sure I missed 2 or 3 of them, of not only the individual technology, but how they're able to work together. So again, from a concepts perspective, you're not going to get a silver bullet, but how are you able to get the technologies to work together and to use not only the new technologies, but how are soldiers and leaders, commanders, able to apply them in different ways that remain American, but to be able to achieve what our country may require us to do, and hopefully we're never asked to.
Awesome. So I know we are going to hear from Dr. Bedell in the next panel from the Army Research Lab, but I wanted some of in your commentary, collaboration is this huge part of what you guys are doing. It seems like you're not working in the silo at all. So I'm curious, how does your team work across not just AFC, but the rest of the Army and the defense communities to kind of bring some of your concepts to bear?
No, great question. So we do have those periodic touch points to be able to move things forward. But one of the other parts of the organization that I run, it's called the Future Study Program, used to be called Unified Quest. It is Title 10, so the Army's main war game, which we can use for whatever question our senior leaders want us to focus on. And this year, what General Murray has asked us to really focus in on is that, so multi-domain operations is the Army's concept for how we'll fight in the future. And that goes through about 2035. But our assessment working with the science and tech community and the threat community is that once we get past that, so the few years after that, when you have these emergent technologies at scale that will allow us to fight differently, that's what we're looking at right now. And so within the Future Study Program this year, we are about ready to have our 4th event late August, where the first event back in November which was kind of like a conference again, so right in the middle of COVID. It was all virtual, but it was having defense and non-defense experts say, what does warfare in 2035 even mean? And so not just looking at from an Army perspective, but looking at everything from climate change to nuclear and really kind of everything in between, from universities, from think tanks, from, of course, DoD people, to help frame what's that problem we're even trying to not solve, but to try to understand. And then the second Future Study Program event that we focused it in on the land power, because at the end of the day, we have to do our homework to be better prepared to fight with our joint partners. And so we did a solarium style event where we put in experts from 3 separate teams, making sure it was a good cross group of it. And then we had a 4th team from the SAMS group that's at Fort Leavenworth, where we have a bunch of, we call them Ahern majors, who are some of the best and brightest, the future leaders. They were our 4th group. And we said, here is your operational challenges in the offense and the defense, and then in the before you get to conflict, here are some technologies, some what we think in 2035 to 40, what we think they'll be able to do. How could you solve this better? And so we just, everybody had the same problem, and they all 4 came out with some really fascinating thoughts on how we could operate differently. And then in the 3rd event, we basically turned it on its head. And we had 1/3 of our participants, so it was about 50 different science and technology experts coming from the DevCom within Army Futures Command, from the Engineering Research and Development Command that's part of the Corps of Engineers, the Space and Missile Defense Command, Development Command, I apologize, so the SNDC, we had the Special Forces, the Special Operations, the USASOC, we had DARPA, partnered with someone from the concepts and said, okay, here's the vignettes that we just gave you. You know the technologies that you think might be feasible by this time. What are different technologies that might allow us to operate differently? And then our 4th event, well, then we have also been working on what do we think this next concept will look like? We have a framework of it. And so in the event that we're going to have in August, it will again be concepts, threats, S&T partners to then test. Is our approach, we're only going to assess. You can't validate or unvalidate this, but we're going to do our first test of what do we think will actually happen based off of, our potential adversary and our capabilities. And then from that, then we'll next year start writing the next operational concept. So we are trying to have some of those ad hoc, meeting people and who else do you know, but then also structuring some of these events in ways where we're having specific events to inform where we think we're going, but then they can go back to their day job and use these insights to then help pull priorities forward.
Right. So it's definitely a multi-level effort, and it is definitely not easy. So you mentioned 2035 before. So come 2035, what do you hope the defense landscape will look like, and how do you see your efforts impacting that directly?
So I know it's going to be more challenging, that we're sure of. So I think to me the most important component would be is that over the past 20 years, the joint force, we have had to work together. We've also had to work very closely with our interagency partners, because this isn't just, within the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. It hasn't just been a Department of Defense challenge. We obviously hope that we have peace for 14 years. I mean, we obviously are involved across the world in many efforts. But my hope and what we're actively working towards is that we don't need a large-scale war in order to understand how we can fight better, and for others to be deterred because they know we can fight better. And so I think this is where efforts like Project Convergence, where we are actively learning and we are finding ways to move the organization forward. So it's not just activity, it's progress, bringing in different modeling and simulations. We have an Army Persistent Experimentation Network, APEN, that we are starting to be able to link our battle labs so that the different lessons that they're learning, we are pulling things forward. So finding new ways to test the systems that they are faster, they have farther ranges, so greater speed, greater range, the ability to achieve convergence. And so using technologies in a different way to be able to understand and to make sure that our soldiers and leaders and commanders are best prepared for that. And there are things that we can do in the synthetic training environment. There are things that we can do in a modeling and simulations. And again, this isn't just an Army challenge. And so having the JADC2 efforts, having the ways that we're linking with our joint partners and then the allies and partners within the mission partner environment, so that we are all moving forward together, so that it's clear it's not the day to test our will, because when called to, if we have to go forward, there needs to be, we never want our soldiers to fight a fair fight, and so we're trying to make sure that in 2035 and beyond, that they know that that's not going to happen either.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, General. Congratulations again. And I'm super excited to see what's going to go on at AFC over the next 15 years toward this effort. And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It has been my pleasure. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
All right. I am going to hand it off to our next panel, which is going to dive right into some more of the defense and national security aspect of some of these very things that General Ahern was discussing. So I will hand it off to my colleague, Jen Morris.